to Sebastian Pohl from Pukka Herbs. As we get started, we just had a fantastic talk already from Carol McKenna at Compassion in World Farming. And after Sebastian's talk, we'll be having a talk from one of our scientific advisory panel, Dr. Mahmoud, who's also one of the authors of the second warning written by the world scientists, and then Dr. Helen Howard later in the afternoon. Just before we start, and I apologize to those that are joining more than one session today, but we're going to start all of our sessions each day with the quotes on the particular stressor coming out of the world scientists' warning of a climate emergency. So I'm going to read out that quote now. Eating mostly plant-based foods while reducing the global consumption of animal products, especially ruminant livestock, can improve human health and significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions, including methane. Moreover, this will free up croplands for growing much needed human plant food instead of livestock feed, while releasing some grazing land to support natural climate solutions. Cropping practices, such as minimum tillage, that increase soil carbon are vitally important. We need to drastically reduce the enormous amount of food waste around the world. Sebastian Pohl is very much integrated into knowledge in the food system and a lot of practices related to it. As the founder of Pukka Herbs, and I did promise I'd try and say this word correctly when I did it, an Ayurvedic practitioner and a herbalist of some renown, having written books and articles on the subjects. Sebastian's in an excellent position to comment on food and the climate. Pukka Herbs, the company that Sebastian founded, is also one of the companies in the world that has declared a climate emergency. That is also a B Corp, which shows its ethical and sustainable credentials. And interestingly, in carrying out its own carbon audit, looked at its carbon audit from crop to cup. And when it looked at its carbon audit from crop to cup on its way to becoming carbon neutral, it identified extraordinarily that 49% of its emissions coming from its crop to cup audit were coming from the boiling of the water of people who were making their cups of tea. And shockingly, half of that was because people were boiling too much water. And instead of boiling for 1 cup, they were boiling for more. So as a result of that, Pukka Herbs then went on to start a campaign to get people to actually boil the right amount of water for their tea. Welcoming then Sebastian. Thank you very much for coming, Sebastian, and we'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Ed, and hello everybody. Thanks for coming along today. Got a huge topic. I'm going to run through some of the problems, talk a little bit about how perhaps we might address them, and yeah, then really look at some of the concrete solutions. And Ed's already given me a nice introduction, but I just thought I'd mention a bit about my background. Essentially, you know, I've been involved in organic and regenerative farming for the last 25 years, and I've visited hundreds of different agricultural projects over that time, and I've seen firsthand the benefits that regenerative agriculture can bring versus an unsustainable approach. I also wanted to mention that I'm a trustee of the Fairwild Foundation, which is dedicated to sustainable wild harvesting, which I'll talk a bit more about that as well, because obviously we get a lot of our food out of the wild. So, you know, for those of you that have joined today that know me, you know, I'm a perennial optimist, really. And I feel that we live in this extraordinary time when we really know what our problems are, and we also know what the solutions are, which is an incredibly sort of privileged position to be in a way, although it is daunting when you look at the problems ahead. You know, how we grow and process and choose and eat nutritious foods are simultaneously, they're the problem and the solution, aren't they? You know, we're driving lots of this, and so we can be at a central part of the solution. And I want to explore some of this relationship with our food around this idea of the 3 biomes, if you like. And It's an idea put together by a colleague and friend of mine at Pukka, Simon Mills. And the idea is that there are these different biomes in relation to the diversity in the planet. So you get a planetary biome, you get a biome in the soil, which we'll talk about in more detail, and a human biome, our own microbiology, if you like. And the relationship we have between all of these just points to how interdependent we all are. And so I want to go into some detail with regards to that. And we've got to this crazy situation, haven't we, where essentially you're rewarded for growing unsustainable, poorly nutritious food, and you're penalized for growing nutritious, sustainable food. And it's leading to a lot of on-cost to society, which we'll go into in more detail. But this crazy idea that we're funding this type of agriculture, which is causing such depletion to our world, has just got to change. And luckily in the UK, there seem to be a few signs of that, which is coming up this week, some very important votes going on in Parliament. This slide put together by Martin Blazer, and he's an expert on microbiology. I just wanted to point out that this is the trajectory. We're going to increase our crops of wheat, rice and corn by 60% in the next 30 years. We already get over 50% of our diet from these crops already. And so in our agricultural system of monoculture, looks like there is a trajectory for that to continue, and we need to address that as part of the solution. A lot of pressure on water, a lot of pressure on chemical deterioration in the environment, and we need to address those. So the Stockholm Resilience Centre has put together where we're overshooting, really. Where are we using too much of the Earth's resources and what's really unsustainable? There's quite a few areas on here, but you can see that particularly in nitrogen, we're really overshooting what the Earth can metabolize and absorb each year. So we're 4 times over the amount of nitrogen that the planetary ecosystem can digest, if you like, and utilize. And that is leading to obviously runoff, and we know about algal blooms happening in various oceans and rivers. But also, more worryingly, is the miss, perhaps, that's happened regarding nitrogen and nitrous oxide being a very potent driver of climate change, 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and it remains in the atmosphere for a huge amount of time. Coupled with that, its ability to affect air pollution as well. And so I want to look at nitrogen in more detail as we go through the talk. So it's well documented the huge loss in biodiversity. I mean, this is really all just depressing, and the last thing we need at the moment as well. But it's a fact, and we need to address it. That habitat loss is driving declines in bird, insect, mammalian life. And something perhaps that doesn't get quite as much airtime is the impact on plants, where 1 in 5 of all the plants in the world, something like 240,000 flowering plants in the world, are thought to be threatened with extinction. And so this comes from the State of the World Plants. Kew Gardens does this remarkable report every year or two, and this is some of the details that's come out of there. So despite all of the cash that we're giving to farming, in Europe to the tune of 60 billion a year we're giving to farmers, we're driving a food system that's leading to greater ill health, and that is a terrible irony and the opposite of what everyone's intention is. So at a time when there's a lot of talk around how you can be healthier, in fact, ultra-processed foods, the consumption of ultra-processed foods is skyrocketing. And this is a report from 2017, or a graph from 2017, showing how in the UK, over 50% of the food in our shopping basket is ultra-processed. Not just processed, but fresh bread, cheeses, foods, lots of things are processed. It's this ultra-processing where the ingredients label is potentially unreadable. And, you can see in the UK, we are well above France, Italy, and Portugal as well. So we really need to look at not just how we're growing food, but how we're encouraging people to eat as well. And there's, you know, very prescient issues regarding hunger and availability to food at the moment. And I've got some ideas that I'd like to talk about as we go through. So overlaid over this monocropped farm, you can see that over the last 55, 60 years, huge drop in nutritional content of certain foods, drop in vitamins A, C, selenium, iron, magnesium. You can see the list. It just goes on, basically, largely due to a decline in quality of food, but also different consumption patterns. So we get this ironic situation that in Europe, at least, there is sufficient to eat for the majority of people, but it's leading to a deficiency in nutrients. And so type A malnutrition is where you are lacking in calories full stop. But type B malnutrition, you actually have enough calories, but not enough micronutrients. And this is a study carried out a few years ago on entrance to hospitals in the UK. So, you know, serious issue there, basically. So all this hard work of us trying to feed the world, we're ending up with a lot of quality, but not, sorry, a lot of quantity, but not enough quality. Here we have a sort of fact about the cost of this. So we think we want, you know, we need to have cheap food so people can afford it. We need to have affordable food. But what we've ended up with is food that's so cheap that it's actually causing loads of on-cost to society. And these figures are quite huge to digest, and the Sustainable Food Trust has broken this down to show that out of every pound we're spending on food, there is a £1 on cost essentially to society, which means there's a £1 on cost to you and me and all of us. And as you go down this list, 25p on natural capital degradation, and keep going down, you know, diet-related disease. 37p out of every pound we spend on food is contributing to diet-related disease, which at the moment, with the diabetes epidemic, obesity being a massive issue, and its relationship with COVID, you know, is even more worrying that we're driving this decline in human potential, if you like. And you can also see here, although I'm not a fan, I have to admit it, of farm support payments, it's only 2.5p we're giving to farmers as well. So all of this money that's on cost, not enough of it is reaching the right people in the right way, and it's not encouraging farmers to be rewarded for doing the right thing for nature. So that's lots of the problems that I've raced through there, because some of it's, you know, well documented. Before I go into what I think we should do, I just thought it'd be worth to just couch a couple of principles that we could perhaps all start to incorporate in our businesses, if you're in government, in our lives. And these are some thoughts by Giles Hutchins and his work on regenerative leadership. And he talks about how we can gain inspiration from nature at 3 levels. So particularly in following the patterns and principles of design and processes, biomimicry, circular economics, you know, organic farming, regenerative farming is a really good example of a closed loop system where everything you take out is put back. Then we need to think of organization as a living system. You know, there's so much to do, isn't there? How do we get the network of communities together to work with the same goal, but to great effect? We know that we've got 10 years to sort out the climate peaking with problems. How do we all activate that right now? And then perhaps, you know, equally as crucial is the leaders who are making these decisions. How are they presencing in their relationship with nature? And so I'm just giving a big call out to anybody in any position whatsoever to spend time in nature and to explore how they can lead in a regenerative way. And we know we need that leadership to change in its style and approach to nature. So here, the idea of organization as a living system. On the left, you see an arterial system, an image of the arterial system in the body. And on the right, you see an image of some river deltas. You know, the synergy and relationship between the patterns in nature is self-evident. this idea of organization as a living system is about taking inspiration from nature and looking at how it works. Probably too much detail to go into here, but essentially we want to reach out to others. We want to diverge and listen to other ways of thinking. We want to then converge and bring that way of thinking back together so that we work in a harmonious and unified way. Allow things to emerge. It doesn't have to be controlled from top down. It can be a totally dynamic system of emergence. And we want to look at how that system relates as a community, but also as individuals. So some good examples of self-organizing systems, and essentially as individuals, as families, as society, as groups, we need to define what is our purpose and our where we want to aim and how do we apply that in practice. And so these are some of the organizations that I think are doing it really well. You know, groups like Fairwild, ideas of 1% for the planet, where businesses sort of tax themselves and give 1% of their sales value every year, not profit, to environmental causes, fair trade movements, and then of course, you know, amazing organizations like Pesticide Action Network, iPhone, Extinction Rebellion, and then of course this great gathering of organizations in the UK called Greener UK, which has pulled together some of the main environmental organizations. You know, these are all sort of examples of organization as a living system. So, bit of theory, something to look into perhaps and read a bit more about and explore how you can bring that into your world. So what should we do about it, basically? You know, we've got to learn from nature, and we've got to see, and you know, you can see just by whether you study it in physics or biology or just with your own eyes, that life is circular and that we need to put back in what we take out. So, you know, this idea is called by various names in farming. It might be agroecology, it might be regenerative farming, it might be organic. But the essence is in the name, you know, regeneration. You know, we have to regenerate and restore soil fertility and biodiversity. And that means we have to farm with crop rotations. We have to have a sort of legume-based fertility cycle in farming again. And we need to have a, you know, mixed cropping system, basically. This idea of monocrops, of huge inputs, you know, that's just got to be history. We've got to find a different way of doing it. You know, this system of regenerative agroecology basically says we've got to give up nitrogen and chemical pesticides. And there's very good evidence that I'll show you that we can do that without anyone going hungry and damaging their commercial opportunities, if that is important. So these are the principles of organic farming. I don't want us to get hung up on the word organic, because I know in the UK it's sort of become potentially controversial, but really organic follows the principles of life. So we want to promote health, and the relationship between soil, plant, animal and humans should be considered as one. We want to have a principle of ecology. Again, this sort of living ecological system thinking. We want to be fair. We've got to make sure that the growers, the farmers, the communities processing the foods, that they benefit as well, basically. And we need to make sure we're caring for everybody in that chain. I've seen too many times in too many countries where pesticides are being applied without safety equipment. I've seen, you know, too many times where farmers are not paid at the farm gate for their commodities. You know, there is a system we have to implement which generates these ways of making everybody feel like there's a value chain. You know, we talk of supply chains, and at Pukka we're particularly keen on value chains where everybody is seen as a partner, and we can debate how equally some of that is spread, but essentially that is considered, and that is thought how that value can pass up and down the chain. Life in the soil. We've got to boost the life in the soil. Worms, we know that glyphosate, various herbicides are impacting on the biota in the soil, insecticides obviously. huge rise in interest in sort of mycelium and the benefits of mycelium going on in the world at the moment. And of course, their natural ability to digest life, to release nutrients, to act as a communication network between different plants, to act as literally an information highway. And there's this quote which I thought would be useful to read: how plants communicate using the underground information superhighway. Through the exudation of a wide variety of compounds, it is suggested that roots can regulate the soil microbial community in their immediate vicinity, withstand herbivory, encourage beneficial symbiosis, change the chemical and physical properties of the soil, and inhibit growth of competing plant species. So essentially, we want to have practices that allow the microbial and the mycelial activity in the ground feed the potential of the roots. And Charles Darwin talked about how the roots of plants are actually the brain of a plant. And you get this incredible ability of plants to communicate between each other, so that where there is insect attack, let's say on one plant, they can send messages underground or through the air using aromatic volatile compounds to communicate with their brothers and sisters that they're being attacked and that they should release noxious compounds so they taste less good. Anyway, essentially it's a network, and we need to find how we can really engage that. Again, this principle of a living system, you know, how we build soil microbiology impacts our own microbiology. And it's not appropriate to go into it today in too much detail, but there's a really great similarity, although it's an unfortunate, between how we farm and how we look after ourselves as a society with our medicines. So the farming approach is to, you know, clean the ground with herbicides, grow intensely nutrified crops. That leads to potential fungal outbreaks, pest attacks. We have to use fungicides, we have to use insecticides, and you get this vicious cycle, basically. With our own human microbiology, we get infections, we use antibiotics, and we have to repair that system afterwards, basically. And so there's some, you know, great techniques in regenerative farming using compost teas, where you're creating like a microbiological starter on the land, and you're feeding the land so that the microbiology of the land is boosted. Cover crops, Ed was mentioning low tillage. Professor Tim Spector, who some of you may well be aware of, and the work he's doing with the SWE app and reporting for COVID, is also a specialist on microbiology and the human microbiome. And he talks about the best way to boost your human microbiome is to eat a diet with 30 different ingredients in every week. And that's one of the best ways you can do it. So look after the soil, look after our own health. I don't want to blast us with too many facts, but there's quite a few coming up. I really want to champion the benefits of organic farming in the face of addressing these serious issues that we see around the nature and climate crisis. So organic farms generate more life. They have 50% more wildlife in numbers of plants and animals, insects, and than conventional farming, basically. So, you know, organic, it literally means an organism, organic farming, and it's about living life as one complete whole. It's got healthier soil, so it's better at building humic acid, and that is what enhances carbon storage. It particularly builds climate resilience, adaptation and mitigation, which I'll mention further. I mean, it's not just that I'm a fan because I've experienced it and I like the principles. I'm a fan because I think it's a serious solution for every human on the planet. And that is what I'm interested in. And it's the most researched system of farming, of sustainable farming. This is a bit of a dense slide, but the first column, you can see the green dots. You go to the top, higher nutrient density has been proven in organic farming. So you get higher nutrient density. Yield we'll talk about a little bit because that's contextual. You get this greater boost in biodiversity, but you get this massive evidence base for how it can help us transform to a sustainable future. And you may have heard of the Rodale Institute. The Rodale Institute in America has carried out this 30-year farming systems trial showing that yields can match, it can be more profitable, it uses less energy and less greenhouse gases, of course. So, you know, this assumption that there will always be a persistent yield gap is what worries people in a way, because people think that that means we're going to need to use more land, and we've already degraded so much of nature, and that is a worry. And that, you know, the previous thinking had been, yeah, well, let's carry on farming, we'll do some you know, greening of the edges of our agricultural world, we'll you know, put a few buffers in. But look, you know, that game's over. I think we've destroyed so much of the natural habitat and farming occupies so much of the land. Farming has to be how we regenerate nature as well. I mean, the two are both required. You know, just because we're applying an unsustainable amount of nitrogen doesn't mean that we can carry on doing that. You know, we need the yields, but we can't keep putting on so many chemicals and so much nitrogen on the ground. And you know, just as we change our diets, which we need to because of health and the obesity and diabetes epidemic, we really need to look at how we would shift away from some of these you know, commodity crops, if you like, which are pumped full of nitrogen. I mean, you know, half of the wheat crop in the UK is fed to livestock, and 80% of the nitrogen input that's used in Europe is for growing crops to feed animals. So, you know, I know the previous talk looked at a little bit of what we're doing with animal husbandry and things, but we've got to address that. And these points that organic, whether you think of it as a certification system or just a principle, it does all of these things. So we know what the problem is. We've been looking for solutions, and we've got the facts, and the facts are well documented by scientists and organizations like IFOAM, which is the International Federation for the Organic Agricultural Movement, and the Soil Association. So we can mitigate climate change. We can adapt to it by, you know, greater soil strength to prevent flooding, greater agroforestry, greater mixed cropping, and we can enhance our resilience to it. It can help us manage temperature, can keep diseases and pests down, and it all goes back to this closed loop. I mean, we need that for our packaging, we need that for plastics, we need that for food, we need that for our life, really. But just to go back to this idea of the 3 biomes, and to talk about how we can, you know, use this idea of transforming farming and transforming our health all at the same time, basically. And this is research that was carried out 6 years or so ago, and looked at how these secondary metabolites in plants, the flavones, the flavonoids, the colorful pigments, the tasty essential oils, are higher in organic crops, not just by a small amount. This is by 50%. Flavonoids, anthocyanins, you know, anthocyanins are the dark compounds in berries, blueberries, raspberries, elderberries, etc. They're major antioxidants, and it just makes total sense, doesn't it? If you're applying a sort of antibiotic, which in a way a fungicide or an insecticide is from a plant's point of view, the plant never needs to develop its own immune system, and these flavonoids, these secondary metabolites, volatile compounds, are like the plant's immune system. So as we get more of those in organic farming, we want to boost that, and that can help with some of the other knock-on issues we're getting from our modern diet. And here you can see a bit of a hectic slide if you're not into medicine, but essentially you can see in the middle the microbiome, and that our plants, whether it's the bitters, the aromatics in ginger, oregano, thyme, all of these herbs we eat in our diet, essentially they interface with our digestive membrane, and they upregulate many of the compounds that help improve our microbiome. And, you know, there's this metaphor, isn't there, that the soil of the earth is our digestive system, just as the atmosphere is our lungs. And we have to care for the soil in our ecosystem as much as we care for our own digestion. And the metaphor is just too powerful. And it's not just a metaphor or something poetic, it's a fact, basically. And so the problem is we're compounding this potential that we have to boost our own health, because insecticides, fungicides, herbicides are shown to interfere, and there's a well-documented pathway to interfere with the gut mucosa. And when you interfere with the gut mucosa with a herbicide or fungicide, we are limiting the ability of our body to operate and upregulate its health. So you get a whole load of complex interactions, essentially interfering with fat storage, with gut inflammation, immune regulation, a whole load of other things affecting our neurology and our mood. And you get these potential to lead to diseases that we're seeing, this massive outbreak in metabolic syndrome due to obesity, largely documented to do with our dietary changes towards ultra-processed foods. But, you know, current research showing that the volume of pesticides that we are all consuming through a non-organic diet is excessive and is contributing to this disruption of our own microbiome and our own soil and our own digestive system. Okay, I think you got that point. I'm not into those and that we need to change that. Just I can't help mentioning, we've got all these incredible plants in the world. I said there were 240,000 flowering plants before. At least 30,000 of them have been used for foods or medicines in some way. So there's huge diversity. You know, diversity is what pays in diet. It's what pays in farming. It's what pays in your friendship group. So we keep adding diversity to your diet. And quickly want to share a particular subject of fascination. You know, of course, lots of the world is dependent on wild foods. Lots of the foods we eat are from the wild, whether it's mushrooms or blueberries. And as a herbalist, 25% of all the plants used in the herbal industry come from the wild by volume. You know, so we're taking millions and millions of kilos out of the wild. And of course, we know with COVID, our relationship with animal hunting in the wild. And we really need to find a way so that we're measuring what we're taking out of the wild and the impact that is having on other plant species, other animal species, other human populations as well. And there is this brilliant scheme called Fairwild. It was set up in conjunction with WWF and Traffic. And it means that you measure, if you want to harvest out of the wild, you measure the resources in the wild, and you make sure you only take out what is appropriate and sustainable. And you also, the fair bit is that you remunerate the local community as well, so that there is access, but there is also benefit sharing back to the community. And that's a majorly important area of ensuring that food security exists well into the future. So, okay, last couple of minutes, just to solutions. You know, it's all over the press in the UK, injustices in our food system. I'm not going to go into it in big detail, but there was this global nutrition report a couple of years ago that really spells out what we need to do. And I think everyone knows, you know, we have to make sure our children get nourishing food, because it just will make everything better in their lives for the future. Go online, go to the Soil Association website, have a look at their Fixing Nitrogen report. I've mentioned quite a lot about nitrogen. The metaphor for me is that we are addicted as a society to nitrogen and pesticides. We have become, through everyone's good intent, and you know, I don't want any farmers that are listening to think that what people are doing through their desire to feed people, but we're like addicts. It's like we can't grow, you know, the soil fertility is depleted so much, we can't grow the volume of food we need without using nitrogen. When we put on the nitrogen, we're forced into putting on insecticides and fungicides, and we're therefore destroying the the life as a living organism principle on which we must go ahead into the future. So I'm sorry, it's a bit of a harsh shot that about addiction, but I feel it's a bit like, you know, an athlete using steroids. You just can't reach the attainment of of what you want, and we need to change that. And organic farming, agroecology has really got a solution. So one of those solutions is that we need to shift the cost base so that we are rewarding farmers and producers for growing sustainable food that benefits the environment. And there is some positive move in the UK with the agricultural bill, the environmental bill, all going back in Parliament this week, so that we must make the polluter pay. You know, anyone that runs a business, you know, it's like fantastic being in a way in farming. You can just sort of offset all your pollution. And I just don't want to pay it as an individual, and I don't want to pay it as someone that's set up an organic company and run it for 20 years. It's not right. You have to get it so that carbon output, nitrogen output, ecosystem sort of degradation, products that kill insects, that kill birds, they need to be taxed. And that's the way we can balance the system, because at the moment it feels like big companies that maybe want to change, they're squeezed into a price war, and until we level the playing field so that the polluter pays and we get an even cost base, and we use that money generated from the polluter paying to ease the cost of food for the whole of society, but particularly families that are struggling to buy healthier foods, we should basically subsidize healthy foods. That seems like a simple way to take pressure off our NHS and the burden that we have going across society. If you want to read about it in detail, there's an amazing study done called the 10 Years for Agroecology, which modeled this impact of how we could transition all the farmland in Europe to organic. And they found that although whilst there would be a drop in yields to some extent, along with a change in dietary habits of meat consumption, we could keep the same levels of food, and we can keep our export capacity, but would drop greenhouse gas emissions by 47%. So, that's a pretty awesome statistic, basically. And what we're trying to do really here, isn't it? It's because COP's been delayed, hasn't it, by a year? We need to keep, pressure's not the right word, we need to keep engaging, hopefully inspiring the British government, who are going to lead COP, to make this transition, to be real leaders, not sometime off in 2050 or 2030. We need it now, basically. And because we've got an ability to end some of our, the common agricultural policy costs in the UK, it does look like there are some potential benefits to going to a polluter pay system where we have the environmental land management scheme, which will reduce our basic farm payment scheme. And that feels very positive, basically, but we have to do it in the right way. European Parliament's just passed another huge cap payment again, which 35% of the EU budget going on promoting industrialized chemical agriculture. It is a crime that needs to be transformed, and that money could help farmers live a more sustainable future, more sustainable income. So what can we all do? Anyone here, you don't have to be in farming, anyone that's working or knows someone in a business, get that business to declare a climate emergency. Even at Pukka, even though we've sort of felt like we've been involved in the environmental movement for 20 years, it's really been a positive thing on the impact, not just on our staff, but on the knowledge and how it is meaning we really focus all our decision making on this fact that we don't want to go over 1.5 degrees climate warming because of the negative impacts that'll have across our whole value chain and all of our livelihoods. So declare a climate emergency. This is a picture of some of the Pukka champions going out and protesting. Get people to set science-based climate targets. That's a massive thing. You have to measure it. If we don't know what we're doing, then we won't ever know how to change it. And as Ed mentioned at the beginning, we were really shocked at Pukka when we found out so much of our carbon footprint was in kettle boiling. I was worried it was in transport or in, whatever, in manufacturing. But it was, you know, so much of it is in our own behavior as individuals. So an obvious thing is to go to a green energy supplier. You know, there are loads of them now. Good Energy, Ecotricity, whoever, you know, get green energy in your house. And last couple of demands, you know, these great organizations coming together, Wildlife and Countryside Link, you know, demanding a natural nature service. You know, how do we get the UK to really give our hard-earned tax, which is under severe pressure at the moment, to really restoring nature in the future? That has to be part of what we do. And because the agricultural bill is going back through Parliament this week, if you want to do something today, you can go onto hashtag Save Our Standards, and Sustain and the NFU are all running campaigns to educate MPs about how we maintain our food standards with a new trade deal. As you've heard me say, we need to transform our food standards as well, so they get a whole lot better. But at the very least, we should protect our British farmers and help them push on with raising the standards. So thank you, everybody. Just leave you with this little quote from a 2,000-year-old Vedic text. The essence of all beings is the earth. The essence of the earth is water. The essence of water is plants. And the essence of plants is people. Let's not forget that. And let's all work together for that future which we know we can create and which is wholly possible. Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody. I will endeavour to hand back to Ed, and there hopefully be a few questions, and we can have a little conversation between us all.
Great, that's fantastic, Sebastian. Thank you very much. Absolutely brilliant. A lot of comments coming through about how great that was. So thank you. And just a comment straight away on something you said near the end about getting the polluter to pay, subsidising healthy food production and reducing the burden on the NHS. You would think is a message that actually would rest well with everybody in government at the moment, as well as helping us with climate change. And I think it's a message we could all be promoting towards our MPs or local councillors. So I think that's fantastic. I'm going to go back up to the top now to try and bring in some of the questions, and we have about just under 15 minutes to do it. And I'm unabashed to say that I was one of the first with a question. So just with a very simple one there, is you talked about the on cost of the pound on every pound spent on food. So for every pound the consumer spends, there's about another pound on cost. Do you consider within that the on cost related to the climate, so cost to sequestering carbon related to it, and that, or would that be additional?
That would be additional. I don't think that's been included. I mean, there's damage to the environment included in that cost, but if we're to sequester it, then that would be further. So
maybe we had
shocking report that. I'd encourage you to read it. It's on the Sustainable Food Trust, and Patrick Holden and his team there. It's a very valuable report, and I think they're looking to upgrade it. So you could look at a measurement system on farm, really. It's not about organic, you know, it's about all farmers joining together. You know, we need, that's why I want to be careful about organic, although I'm a massive fan of it. We don't want people to be excluded. It's like a principle.
Right. In terms of questions, so a question here from Brian McGavin on soil fertility. The UN FAO warned in 2013 that on our current trajectory, the world's topsoil would be substantially depleted by 2060. Yet there was hardly any reaction from our political and business leaders. How can we wake them up?
Well, you know, to be honest, to be honest, the sign, you know, we know that the situation, and politicians know as well, but they're not acting. So I can't think of anything better to do really than be an activist yourself. Just do anything we can. You know, last year was so encouraging, wasn't it, with the school strikes, Extinction Rebellion. Now, I know they're controversial tactics in some ways, but my call is anyone that works in any organization, or if you know anybody doing it, tell them about declaring a climate emergency, because those things will have a knock-on effect through the organization as a conversation. And then, you know, work with organizations like Greener UK, Link, and give them a little bit of money if you can, lobby with them. But essentially, we all need to sort of hit the streets because the government's not shifting. And Jonathan Porritt just wrote a great book, actually. I'm a big fan of Jonathan. It's called Hope in Hell. It's a very heavy read, as all these books on the environment are, but it it's really is hopeful as well about what we can do. And we just have to keep plugging at it. That's what we have to do. And the difficulty, I think, is, Ed, is that because we know the fact, it can feel so scary and it can feel like we can be despondent. But, 20 years ago, we didn't know lots of these situations. It was sort of theory. I mean, you could say 40 years ago, 50 years ago, we know the facts and we're the generations that have to live with that pain, but we know the solution. I mean, how lucky are we to know that? That's what gives me hope. And that's so, the hashtag at the end, write to your MP today, please, about maintaining British standards. This is save our standards. Depending on your position in life, on your age, we just got to keep pushing the politicians to change, I think, and, work together. I'm really into network systems. Everybody mustn't put each other against each other in the environmental movement. We're all heading for the same North Star. Let's do that together.
And I so much agree with you. And if I can add something in today, which I have said in one of the other talks already, is having had experience of standing in the general election with only one policy, which was to reverse climate change, having no chance of winning whatsoever and never really intending to win, I would urge everybody, and to say to friends, etc. as well, to go to parish councils and join them. Many of them have spaces on them and you can get in and try and get them to declare a climate emergency, to put yourself forward for the county council elections that are coming up next year, and put yourself forward as an independent with only one policy to reverse climate change. And if you do, you won't win, so you don't have to put up with any problems of being a councillor later on, but you'll make a huge statement and you may well convert a lot of councillors on the way. So that's a way to put your political activism into action, not just writing to your MP, but take it a lot further. Anyway, my little plug for one of the things I'd like to see people doing. There's been quite a bit of debate about population. So maybe to sort of summarize, I think from a number of questions here, as the population of the world grows, possibly up towards the 10, 11 billion mark, are we going to be able to feed the world with regenerative agriculture or organic farming? Or are we simply going to be coming back to the old methods later on?
Well, I obviously need to do a better job in justifying that. I think it's been well documented. This IDRI study that took place a couple of years ago showed that we could convert all of European production to organic and still feed everybody and mitigate greenhouse gases by 47%. So the other fact is that 50% of the food in the world is grown by small-scale farmers anyway. I mean, I find that, I'm not saying this was in the question, but I find the idea that we have to feed the world quite an arrogant supposition. And most of the food in the world is grown by small-scale farmers that, if they could be educated further about optimizing efficiencies, then I don't think that's an issue. The thing is, our baseline's so distorted. We've all got used to this being just a massive monoculture of very few different crops. And if we go to a more diverse system where you're also mitigating food waste and you're eating, we've got to transition away from so much meat, we know that, to better meat. The scientific evidence is that is wholly possible, basically, and we have to do it. It's not even a choice, really. We can't keep losing so many insects. We can't keep losing so many birds. It's not life without them. We need to have them for our own health, if we're just being selfish about it, but we need to have it for the wellness of the ecosystem. So for me, it's not so much can we do it, it's we have to do it. And technology is brilliant as well. It's not like it's organic's all back to the past. It's actually totally progressive. And you go to some of these great organic projects around in the UK, I don't know, like Riverford, their box, some remarkable farming techniques going on that is highly efficient and productive. So you have to take my word for it. But read the IDRI study if you really want to do it, and if you want to look into the facts.
Right. We've got a question from Will Saunders. I've heard we only have a few years usable topsoil left. Is this correct or alarmist?
I think that is, was quite a broad research done, I think, by the FAO, wasn't it, showing that there was sort of 60 summers or 60 harvests left. It's certainly true in some parts of the world, isn't it? Because Pukka, we've heat mapped and water resource mapped where we grow a lot of our herbal species, and they're going to be too hot to grow some of the species. You can see in the runoff we're getting when there's heavy rain into the rivers in the UK, they're all silting up and clouded for days. So it does seem like that it won't be only 60 harvests everywhere, but it seems like we're limiting our availability to land use, basically. And that will put huge pressure on certain populations. I mean, Syria, I don't think it's solely down to climate, but it looks like lots of the pressure on land use and soil fertility there has driven a country into a terrible crisis. So I think we need to worry about that, yeah. And I didn't say it, but basically, as individuals, we got to pay it ahead, and it's painful because sustainable food's more expensive at the moment, a little bit. We got to pay it ahead, and you have to put your pound where you believe that change can be. And as individuals, we can talk about plastic and straws and all this stuff, but we got to do something more urgent, and that's really our whole shopping basket. That's how we change the planet. If our shopping basket is brilliant and it's a better shop, it'll be better for you, and it'll be better for society, basically. And I know that can be a big ask, but we need to look at how we support people to do that.
Right, thank you. So two sort of questions together. Holly Whitelaw, soil is our best carbon storage system, isn't it? But then Esther Phillips says, apparently it is algae, but of course soil is crucial. Any comments on that?
I think it's, but it's both, isn't it? Obviously we store lots of carbon in the sea, of course. I thought the sea was the largest sink, but it's stored all over the place. There's everywhere. It's in peat, bogs, it's in the soil. But I think we have to think about the things we can influence. And the sea's a bit less easy, and there's sort of mitigation factors we can do there. The soil is in our grasp in a way. We've deforested the land in lots of areas to grow food. The least we could do is care for that soil in a way that builds its fertility and leaves it there for not just future generations, but creates delicious tasting, highly nutritious food, because that's what we want. And that can be done with these simple techniques of, crop rotation, leguminous nitrogen fixing, low till, and compost tea is one of the things I'm super keen on, basically, and composting. So we can do that, and farmers are doing it. There's some amazing farmers around the country, organic or otherwise, that are practicing these techniques and being very productive and profitable.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think there's mainly now just comments and a bit of discussion about Green Party, climate emergencies and parish councillors. And a few comments of buy local regenerative foods, make your own food choices count, buy organic if you possibly can. Greater the demand, the more farmers will be encouraged to adopt organic growing methods. I think this may be something that's often discussed is, where do you really think it comes from? We talked about the shopping basket, but where is the most likely action going to come from? Is it from us adjusting our shopping and being prepared to pay the extra £1 or £2 for every pound we're currently spending? Or is it government, on the basis that it knows what's best for us and should be doing what's the most diplomatic and correct thing, actually imposing those taxes on us and then reallocating it? So top down, bottom up.
I'm a multi-dimensional person, Ed, and I don't want to cop out. Of course, you need structural change. We have 30% of our energy now in the UK is from renewable sources. That's structural change from commercial investments, lobbying government, and government investment as well. So, of course, it needs to be structural. Yeah, the farming thing, got to fix it from above, because these volumes of cash, 60 billion in Europe every year, there's just so much money going towards farming unsustainably. But politicians answer to the people. And, if we were able to take a call, for example, for a while as a community to just buy healthy food or just buy regenerative food, I think that would be positive. So I think we just need it to be in every direction. But if protest is going to change things, we know the big movements in the world with suffragettes, racial equality, etc. You've got to not take that bus, or you've got to choose which way we put our money, and that is a good way to force businesses at least to change, even if we can't change government in that way. But I think it's multidimensional.
And then just, I think one last, and we really are near at the end, so sort of 30 seconds, you talked very briefly about the government and leadership in COP26. If you could pick out one or maybe two strands of what the present government should be doing on its way to COP26, what would be your favourite one or two?
I would immediately put in a big reward for farmers that are looking after nature, and I would immediately put in a tax for everyone in every value chain that is not contributing towards a sustainable future, and I would take the profit from that tax and I would subsidise the cost of healthier foods, and I would shift demand that way. I know it's not popular in government to do that, but I think we need to take from Peter and give to Paul and make the system work.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you so much, Sebastian. That's absolutely great. Thank you very much. I think everybody's loved it, and there's been a lot of positive questions and positive comments. While we're all on, and following on from actually Sebastian's comment about getting action for COP26, as that's what Scientists Warning Europe is all about for this year, driving science-led action into COP26. And as Sebastian has mentioned, that involves us looking at what the government and politicians are doing. Well, the government is a Conservative government, and we're going to have Boris Johnson for the whole of the next 12 months, we expect. So please focus your attention if you're trying to put pressure on people or explaining to them about the climate emergency or the food emergency or the biodiversity crisis. Make sure you're communicating with your councillors and your MPs as we go towards COP26. There is no reason why we shouldn't see Boris Johnson holding a Nobel Peace Prize because we pushed him towards it, and he has declared Britain to be on a 2030 net zero target, or has taken up some of the suggestions that Seb has outlined in his talk. So let's be active in doing that as much as we can. Thank you so much, Seb. Everybody, we have two more talks on food coming up. In half an hour, we have Dr. Mahmood, who was one of the co-authors of the World Scientists Warning to Humanity, A Second Notice, talking about the food crisis in Nigeria, but also about how using satellite technology, you can solve how foods how the land is selected for the correct food types to be planted to make it the most efficient. And that could be then for organic farming, of course. And the second talk then by Dr. Helen Howard, coming at, I think, 4 o'clock. And Dr. Helen Howard is an environmental social scientist. So look forward to seeing a lot of you again in half an hour. And thank you so much, Seb. That's great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yes, bye.